Markovic was born on the 10th of May 1930 in Belgrade, part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. His early childhood was spent during the Second World War. Then, during the reign of President Tito, Markovic and his cousin Milos Milosevic became well-known street fighters in the city. Markovic's skills attracted the attention of Serbian gangster Nikola Milinkovic, which ultimately resulted in Markovic being one of the main mourners at Milinkovic's funeral. He was very different from his friend Milosevic, who came from a local influential family. His grandfather was the mayor of the town of Nijasevic, but over time most of their private property was confiscated and transferred to the state, which undoubtedly caused serious dissatisfaction with Milosevic. He started looking for a way to get out of the country and move to the west. However, Markovic was the first to get out of the country. In the summer of 1958, together with 4 other people, he went on a summer vacation to the Istrian Peninsula, and from there slipped abroad. At first, he went to Italy. From there, he moved across the Alps to France, where he quickly found a common language with the Paris Association of Immigrants. He spent 7 years trying to earn money. He worked part-time as a photographer, introduced a nomadic lifestyle, slept in flop houses, and eventually got back on the streets. There he again began to apply the skills he had learned in Belgrade. Markovic ended up in a Belgian prison after a failed robbery attempt, where he played the role of a driver. Meanwhile, Milos Milosevic was lucky in Belgrade. Alain Delon arrived in the city on the set of a film about Mark Paul in 1962. The production of the film was never completed, but while in the country, Delon hired Milosevic as a security guard. Together they flew to Venice for filming. Then to Paris, where Milosevic stayed until 1964 year. And then I decided to try my luck in Hollywood, and introduced Delon to his future wife, Natalie Barthélemy. When Milos quit, Delon had to look for a new bodyguard. Milos offered his cousin Markovic for this role. Delon helped him get out of prison, and Markovic suddenly plunged into a new world of money and connections, which bordered on a world that Markovic knew firsthand. Milosevic enjoyed Hollywood life and married the dancer Cynthia Buren, who was known for her connections with some influential people of that time. By 1965 year, Milosevic had an illicit relationship with actress Barbara Ann Thomas, the ex-wife of actor Mickey Rooney. 24-year-old Milosevic and 29-year-old Thomason were found murdered on January 31, 1966 year, at Rooney's house in Los Angeles. It was established that Milosevic shot Rooney with a revolver first by Thomas, and then shot himself. That was the official version. Although at that time, this murder raised a lot of questions, and many of the evidence did not agree with the official version. On October 30, 1973, the body of 39-year-old Cynthia Buren was found in the trunk of a car parked at a supermarket. She was tied up and beaten to death. The body had been in the car for at least a week. The woman's killer was never found. Meanwhile, in France, Markovic also enjoyed life and had the opportunity to apply the skills he learned from Nikola Milinkovic. He was a gambler. He was often suspected of fraud. But most of all, he was known for his high-class parties that were filled with sex. At these parties, where representatives of the French authorities were often present, Markovic made sure that video cameras were placed everywhere, including in the bedrooms. Delon's role at these parties is unknown, but he was far from the image of a crystal-clear movie star. and was associated with the world of organized crime. Delon was fascinated by gangsters and often embodied their images on the screen himself. He also had a lot of bandits as friends. One of these friends was Gaetano Zampa, who was often associated with the massacre in a Marseille bar where 10 people were killed, and the murder of politician Marcel Francisca. In 1970, Alain Delon said in an interview, "Perhaps you will not understand a lot. It's a matter of origin. I am a Corsican myself, and in such places, feelings of honor and dignity still have weight. I'm not worried about what my friend did. Everyone is responsible for their own actions. It doesn't matter what he did. Most of my friends are gangsters. We became friends even before I became an actor in the second half of the 60s. Alain Delon was one of the main sex symbols in Europe, having received recognition for such films as In the Bright Sun, where he played the psychopath Tom Ripley, Rocco and his brothers, Eclipse, Adventurers and Samurai. Nevertheless, despite the money and famous, Delon was associated with the infamous Corsican godfather François Marcantoni. Marcantoni was a well-known mobster and an influential member of the resistance during World War II, for which he received awards such as the Military Cross and the Resistance Medal. He was feuding with other classic mafiosi of the criminal history of France. Among them were the Madman Pirate and Francis the Belgian. They enjoyed the opportunity to penetrate the circles of the establishment and the glamorous life of stars like Alain Delon and his rival Jean-Paul Belmondo. Everything would have worked out well for Markovic if he hadn't decided to start selling joint photos of Delon and Marcantoni to the press. But for now, Delon remained a superstar, and Marcantoni a well-known criminal. Still, they were not the largest fish depicted in Markovic's photographs. There was someone cooler there, namely Claude Pompidou, the wife of the Prime Minister, and later the President of France, Georges Pompidou. Both were regulars at Markovic's parties. The 60s were a time of political upheaval for France. The Fifth Republic of France was only 10 years old. The Fifth Republic is called the time that began to be counted after the adoption of the new constitution of the country. This period, by the way, still lasts. So, in May of 1968, numerous protests by students and workers brought the country almost to civil war. Charles de Gaulle had to resort to the help of the army to maintain power in the country. At the end of June, the country went to the polls, and Prime Minister Georges Pompidou from de Gaulle's team used a proven campaign tactic, calling for national security, talking about protecting the Republic from the Red threat. It was a long-time hackneyed method called Red under the bed. But it worked. The Union of Democrats in support of the Republic was created, which defeated the Federation of Democratic and Socialist Left forces under the leadership of another Prime Minister François Mitterrand. However, during the campaign, tension grew between de Gaulle and Pompidou as a result. François Mitterrand resigned just a month after the election, and Pompidou began to be advertised as the person who should replace the military leader of France, who at that time was already 78 years old. The protests in France coincided with the relationship between Delon and Markovic. At the same time, Delon was increasingly concerned about the lifestyle of his bodyguard. Thousands of francs were spent on gambling. There were rumors that Markovic had an affair with Delon's wife Natalie. Delon offered Markovic a large sum of severance pay, but the bodyguard refused. He wanted more. What the famous actor could not do in principle, most believe that it was Delon's unwillingness to pay that forced Markovic to turn to blackmail. On September 22, 1968, Markovic left his house and headed to the intersection, where he got into a taxi. Black Peugeot 404. A man was already waiting for him in the back seat of the car. According to witnesses, it was his friend Uros Milicevic. On the 1st of October, when Delon was on the set of the film Pool in Saint-Tropez, Markovic's body was found in a landfill in the commune Elancourt, west of Paris. Forensic experts concluded that Stevan was killed. Hands and feet were tied, the body was wrapped in a sheet. Initially, investigators assumed that Stevan Markovic died from blunt force trauma. During the second autopsy, the results of the first one were annulled. The cause of death this time was called a gunshot wound. Delon was summoned for questioning in Paris, and initially he denied that he even knew Markovic. Unfortunately for Alain, the gendarmes had Markovic's letters at their disposal, which he wrote to his friends. In many of them, he described his difficult financial situation and dissatisfaction with working for Alain Delon and his wife. In one of the letters to his brother in Yugoslavia, Stevan said that he was going to do something grandiose that would change his life forever. In his letters, he also talked about Markenton, so the gendarmes were quickly able to promote this case and find out about sex parties and the participation of both Delon and the Pompidou family in them. They also learned about the obscene photos of Claude Pompidou, which were taken by Stevan Markovic. More attention was drawn to Delon and Marc-Antony after another letter from Stevan to his brother. In this letter, he said, "If I am killed, then it is 100% the fault of Alain Delon and his godfather François Marc-Antony." There were rumors that Delon was involved in Markovic's death because Stevan filmed Delon's participation in a gay orgy. This recording could harm the image of Delon, who was one of the main sex symbols and the most recognizable actor in Europe. However, when Alain Delon gave an interview on the same case to the BBC in 1969, he was happy to hint that he was bisexual. What's wrong with having homosexual tastes? Did I hurt someone? Am I to blame for something? If I like something, I do it. We have a great actor in France named Michel Simon. And Michel Simon once said, "If you like your goat, make love with your goat. Only love has meaning." During the interrogation, Uros Milicevic said that Stevan got out of the taxi and got into another taxi. Uros Milicevic returned to Belgrade and told there that his life was in danger in France. He wrote 2 letters. One to Stevan's brother in Yugoslavia, the second to Nathalie Delon, Alain Delon's wife. He supported Markovic's claim that Alain Delon and François Marc-Antony were involved in his murder, and that they tried to hide in the apartment of Stevan's girlfriend, Claude Haas. It was believed that Markovic had a lot of materials for blackmail. According to Marc-Antony, they had to meet, talk, and peacefully resolve all their issues. However, there is an alternative version of events. Some said that the following actually happened in Saint-Tropez. Marc-Antony, Delon, and Milicevic spent their free time together from filming the film. After learning about the impending blackmail, Delon instructed Milicevic to fly to Paris and find all the materials: diaries, notebooks, and photographs. It is also interesting that Milicevic told investigators about the gunshot wound even before the second autopsy of Markovic. I remind you that initially the cause of death was considered a blunt force blow. It is also interesting that on the 22nd of September, on the day when Markovic disappeared, no one saw Delon in Saint-Tropez. A postcard with his handwriting was found thrown into a box near Maison Avenue, not far from Markovic's house, and the intersection where he got into a taxi. Perhaps the most significant statement about Milicevic's involvement came from Milicevic himself, who eventually confessed to hiring an assassin to kill Markovic. However, his confession was considered unconvincing. The reports stated that Milicevic was insane at the time of his testimony. François Marcantoni was also arrested in this case. He spent 11 months in prison, during which time he was subjected to intensive interrogations. However, in December of 1969, he was released due to lack of evidence. Meanwhile, a scandal broke out in the press around Pompidou. Everyone around represented him as a puppet master who allowed his wife to participate in orgies. Pompidou aspired to become president of France, and this scandal seriously threatened his ambitions. Using the tactics of who benefits from it, Pompidou blamed the External Documentation Service of Counterintelligence for everything. He confirmed that he and his wife participated in such parties, but did not confirm participation in orgies, saying that the photo shows a prostitute who looks very similar to his wife. Lucien Aime Blanc was an officer from Marseille. He worked in the Search and Response Brigade, as well as the Anti-Drug Brigade. These law enforcement agencies interact with representatives of organized crime. They investigate cases related to terrorism, hostage-taking, and kidnappings. Aime Blanc at that time was associated with the Service of External Documentation and Counterintelligence. In his memoirs, he wrote that a friend asked him to find a prostitute who looked like Claude Pompidou. Markovic took her photo. Now you can endlessly speculate whether this is true or fiction for the red word in the book. But at the time, Alain Delon also assumed that the police were trying to blame innocent people for this murder. Delon wrote to President Pompidou to complain about the treatment of the authorities in relation to him. He reported that he had been harassed, insulted, and threatened. His letter was published in the newspaper, where the words of one of the policemen were quoted. "Sooner or later you will be punished one way or another." Officials did not hesitate to say that they would plant drugs on Delon during his visits to Italy or Colombia. Who was the organizer of the murder of Stevan Markovic is still unknown. All the evidence in this case is kept classified in the repository of the External Documentation and Counterintelligence Service. It has now been renamed the Directorate General of External Security. However, one name has always flashed in this case: Jean-Charles Marchionni. Marchionni was recruited by the service when he was only 19 years old. He was a fanatical supporter of Charles de Gaulle, who was known to be strongly opposed to Pompidou. In addition, Marchionni turned out to be Marcantoni's cousin. As a result, the Markovic case did not prevent Georges Pompidou from becoming president. Meanwhile, Alain Delon, on the wave of fame added thanks to this case, received the main roles in two gangster thrillers. The Sicilian Clan and Barcelona, both films became hits in 1991. Alain Delon became a Knight of the Legion of Honor. Belonging to the order is the highest sign of distinction, honor, and official recognition of special merits in France. In 1976 year, the Brussels police found two corpses in one of the city apartments. One of them was Milicevic. He was involved in activities against the leader of Yugoslavia, Tito. This murder took place against the background of a series of murders attributed to Yugoslav intelligence. The other deceased was Miodrag Boskovic, an antiques dealer, a hotel owner, and an activist of Serbian royalists. After more than 50 years, there are no chances to find the murderer of Stevan Markovic. Two influential people were involved in this case. Only two defendants survived, Jean-Charles Marchionni and Alain Delon. And as an experienced scout, Marchionni is unlikely to tell anything. Delon was silent then, and is silent now. Regardless of who committed the murder, Delon's friends from the gangster world, the French secret services, or the association of both. There is still a strong belief that no one in the French establishment wants this case to be solved.